It is Minneapolis. We're watching it.
Dante's
Dante's boxing nation. Keep watching. Bye.
Dante's Boxing Nation, what's going on, guys? So according to Bob Arum, who did an interview with the Boxing Voice, Tim Bradley will most likely be facing Brandon Rios by the end of this year. Boy, oh boy, I tell you, Tim Bradley cannot get a break. And when I say a break, I mean a break in competition. Now, you know what's so funny with me saying this is, in a certain sense, Brandon Rios would almost be considered a break if you compare him to all of the other lions that Tim Bradley has been facing. I mean, it's unprecedented the type of competition that Tim Bradley has been in the ring with. This, I mean, if you go all the way back to when Tim Bradley was at 140 pounds, Tim Bradley beat the lineal champion, who was a very good champion at the time, Junior Witter. He beat him, right? Then he beats Kendall Holt, another guy who was a beast, and he was in his prime at the time. All right. Now, don't get me wrong; he had a loss on his record, but he was in his prime. He beat Kendall Holt. Then he beat Nate Campbell. Now, understand the Nate Campbell situation. When Manny Pacquiao was moving through the weight classes, Nate Campbell was the best fighter at lightweight. So when Manny Pacquiao stopped by the lightweight division, instead of fighting Nate Campbell, who did he decide to fight? He decided to fight David Diaz, a guy that was flat-footed and very easy to hit, right? Instead of him fighting David Diaz and then turning around and fight Nate Campbell, Manny Pacquiao, he got a title from David Diaz, and he continued to move up in the weight classes, right? So while Manny Pacquiao didn't want to fight Nate Campbell, Tim Bradley, he does fight Nate Campbell. And as far as I'm concerned, he won the fight even though it was ruled a no contest. Then after that, Tim Bradley gets called out by, at the time, the most dangerous fighter at 140, and that was Devin Alexander. Fans start saying that Tim Bradley is ducking Devin Alexander, including Devin himself, right? Now understand this, guys. At this time, Tim Bradley, he could have easily used the typical excuse that fighters use when they feel a certain opponent is a threat, and they basically say, oh, well, that guy is not a big enough star. He doesn't generate numbers. His numbers is weak and, TV ratings, et cetera, et cetera. Tim Bradley could have did this with Devin Alexander because at the time, Tim Bradley was a bigger star than Devin Alexander. But did Tim do that? No. You know what he did? He decided to fight the undefeated Devin Alexander. And he dominated Devin Alexander. Then Tim Bradley jumps up to welterweight and he dominates the undefeated Luis Abregu, who was a good undefeated fighter and was towering over Tim Bradley during the fight because he was about, 3-4 inches taller than Tim Bradley. And Tim Bradley outboxed the boxer with a reach disadvantage, right? Now, all the stuff that I just told you guys, would it shock you if I told you that when Bob Arum announced that Manny Pacquiao's next opponent was Tim the Desert Storm Bradley, I remember it like it was yesterday. Reading all my comments and other comments, do you know that the majority of these ignorant fans had the nerve to say that Tim Bradley doesn't deserve to fight Manny Pacquiao? He's a bum, and I'd rather see Pacquiao versus Cotto rematch. Even though Pacquiao had already stopped Cotto, they were saying they'd rather see that fight. They were saying they weren't going to pay for this garbage fight Bradley is a bum, doesn't deserve to fight, man. This is what they were saying, guys. This is what they were saying. After I just gave you this man's resume, leading all the way up to the Manny Pacquiao fight, this is what they said about Tim Bradley. Could it be because he's on a coincidental list? I guess that goes without being said, right? So anyway, then Tim Bradley fights Manny Pacquiao. He beats Manny Pacquiao. After he beats Manny Pacquiao, his first title defense is against Ruslan Provodnikov, right? He almost gets beat in that fight, so that gives the legendary Mexican Juan Manuel Marquez confidence for him to get in the ring with Tim Bradley. But guess what? Tim Bradley beats Juan Manuel Marquez. Then he gives Manny Pacquiao a rematch. He loses to Manny Pacquiao. After he loses to Manny Pacquiao, he comes back and he fights Diego Chavez. Then the undefeated Jesse Vargas. And now they're talking about throwing him in there with Brandon Bam Bam Rios. If he gets past Brandon Rios, they're going to throw him in there with another great undefeated prospect and number one contender, Sadam Ali. Man, oh man. That is one hell of a list. And if that wasn't enough, Tim Bradley is even calling out Gennady Golovkin, the much bigger, much stronger Gennady Golovkin. Think about what that says about Tim Bradley's heart. Tim Bradley is willing to fight a middleweight who's 2 divisions bigger than him. But then I hear some of these boxing fans say that Andre Ward is too big for Golovkin. Does that make any sense, guys? So Tim Bradley is going to fight against Brandon Rios. Once the fight is official, I'll go ahead and break it down. This is not an easy fight for Tim Bradley. I mean, it may be easier than some fights, but because of Tim Bradley's scar tissue that seems to be deteriorating a little bit. You know, when he fought against, Jesse Vargas, he hardly even got touched in that fight, and his face was all lumped up like he had got hit with a million shots, right? So I wonder if the wear and tear is really starting to affect Tim Bradley, all the wars that he's been in. It hasn't been a whole lot of wars, but that gives Brandon Rios a better chance in this fight. Not saying Brandon will win, but that gives him a better chance. You know, with Tim Bradley getting hit a little bit more as his career progresses, makes for a very good fight. I mean, don't get me wrong, Tim Bradley could possibly go in here and dominate Brandon Rios, but it could also be a back and forth seesaw fight. You know, it just really depends. I mean, we've seen Tim Bradley dominate Jesse Vargas and then get caught with one shot and he was hurt. Now, we know one thing about Brandon Rios, or at least when he fights against Tim Bradley, I think he's going to be a lot more aggressive because Brandon Rios was gun-shy when he fought against Manny Pacquiao. I don't think he will be as gun-shy when he fights against Tim Bradley, considering the fact that Tim probably doesn't have Pacquiao punching power. So let me wrap up by saying this. Going back to Tim Bradley's incredible resume, I will say this. If Tim Bradley would have been able to beat Manny Pacquiao in a rematch, which I know Tim Bradley was injured. We seen him affected in the fight. You know, it's not one of these injuries where a guy throws a million punches and then says his shoulder hurts when we see him throwing the shoulder over and over again. When Tim Bradley says he's injured, we see the injury as he's fighting, right? But with that being said, if Tim Bradley would have been able to beat Manny Pacquiao, because a loss is a loss. He lost to Manny Pacquiao. If he would have been able to beat Manny Pacquiao in that rematch, I think fans would have been debating on who's number one, Mayweather or Tim Bradley, just like they did with Mayweather versus Andre Ward. Remember, everyone was having the debates, who's number one, Andre Ward or Floyd Mayweather. I think people would have been saying this when it comes to Tim Bradley. But once again, unfortunately, he didn't beat Manny Pacquiao. You know, it's one thing fighting a whole bunch of big names, but it's another thing beating them all. All right? And we know that when it comes to Floyd Mayweather, he beat them all, which is a very hard task to follow. But for all we know, Tim Bradley may get a rubber match with Manny Pacquiao. And I think all of us will probably agree that that's a 50-50 fight, right? Manny Pacquiao coming off of a loss against Floyd Mayweather. Tim Bradley's beating up all of the young lions. Some people might even favor Tim Bradley to beat Manny Pacquiao in a rubber match. But the road that Tim Bradley has ahead is a tough one. I mean, like I said, he gets past Brandon Rios, and then he gets in the ring with Sadam Ali. Shoot, I wouldn't mind seeing Pacquiao versus Sadam Ali. That would be a great fight. But Tim Bradley is most likely going to fight him, and I also think it's pretty interesting how this WBO belt that Tim Bradley has is the belt that he won over Manny Pacquiao. How crazy is that, right? All of a sudden, the belt comes back home, or at least probably the way Tim Bradley would put it, it comes back home to Tim Bradley. So we'll see, man. We'll see what happens in the future. That's all I got. I'm on to the next one.